The crew mess was like the bar in the original Star Wars movie, only without the music or the attitude. A dizzying variety of creatures of various shapes and colors and morphologies stood in lines or sat at tables, talking and laughing. The selection of food was impressive, set on a long counter full of separate trays. The formers, in all their wisdoms, seemed to not be able to devise anything more advanced than a buffet. I stood in line with Urgh and examined the overwhelming selection, not knowing what most of the dishes were, but noting that they were protected by a cosmic sneeze guard. "I guess I don't get to use a food replicator?" I asked. He burst out laughing.
"Individual use of a food production unit on a ship this size? You truly do know nothing."
"Wait a minute," I said. "Does that mean there are food replicators?"
"Of course," he said. "Do you think we have a pantry and cooks? But food production units are massive, which is why you will find restaurants and food vendors always clustered together on Confederation Central. We have one on this ship, and the mess officer is in charge of the daily offerings."
"Nanotechnology?" I asked.
"How else? The same way nanites can increase your abilities or heal you, or even alter your appearance if you so desire, they can fabricate atoms out of different atoms, thus food. Now let's see what we have. Don't be afraid to try something new,"
he said as we shuffled past our options. There were piles and globs and mounds of things that I couldn't even guess at. Other foods were more recognizable. There were noodles, though they were the color of blueberries and kind of oily, strange kinds of oblong fruit, a tray of what were almost certainly greens, except they were bright orange. There was a lot, and I didn't know what any of it might be. I'm not a terribly fussy eater, but I still like to know roughly what something is before I put it into my mouth.
"Your HUD will alert you if you attempt to eat any substance toxic to your biochemistry. If there is no warning, it will be safe, though it might taste like excrement to you."
He loaded his tray with a pool of brown slop. "What's that?" I asked.
"Excrement,"
he said. "In dried fruit sauce." I studied his face for signs he was joking, but since I had no idea what those signs would look like, I quickly gave up. "I thought your species were predators," I said.
"Oh, way back, sure. Excrement is a delicacy among many cultures on my world. Some suspect that we used to like to eat it directly from the bowels of our freshly caught prey, but there's no need to read too much into it. It tastes good."
I picked up something that looked kind of like a roll. "What's this?" I asked.
"It's a different kind of excrement."
I set it down. He made a hissing noise that I soon realized was laughter.
"I'm joking with you, Zeke. It's a kind of baked grain product. I know many species don't like to eat excrement."
He picked up a glass of yellowish liquid.
"But you do drink urine, I hope."
After dinner, we went to a kind of practice room that looked a bit like a small cubicle filled office, and a little bit like one of those tiny game arcades they sometimes have in hotels. There was a series of divided consoles that could be made to operate like any workstation on the ship. Urgh and I sat down at two adjacent cubicles, and he pressed a few buttons to lower the partition between us. He then called up his data bracelet keyboard, which looked nothing like my default keyboard. His was spherical and contained hundreds of strange markings. The sphere rotated constantly to keep up with his typing.
"You have to sync the station to your data bracelet so the HUD can coordinate the sim," he said.
I called up my own keyboard, and he showed me what to do. It was actually fairly intuitive given what I'd already learned about operating the data bracelet.
"You'll run the weapons console, and I'll handle navigation," he said. "We could create artificial crewmen, including a captain if you like, but then you would have to follow orders. I think it is better if you learn some basics for now, so we'll assume we've been given freedom by the captain to proceed as we think best."
I looked up at the display monitor. "So the sim will appear on the screen here?" He opened his massive jaws and showed me his sharp teeth. Then he snorted a hearty laugh.
"Oh, you'll see."
"Is that a smile?" I asked.
"An evil one,"
he said. Then he did it again.
"Now, pay attention. The PPB, The phased particle beam is your go-to weapon of choice. You know what dark matter is?
Yeah, it's the mysterious stuff we can't perceive that makes up most of the universe.
Good. You know more than I did. Just like there is dark matter, there is dark energy. Extremely powerful energy we cannot see or measure. The formers understood its secrets, and we use their technology to harness dark energy and deploy it for weapons and shielding. The dark energy causes the particle beam to phase in and out of the universe, generating power at its bursts into existence and non-existence. The PPB is fast and flexible, and there will be more or less a limitless supply while the engines are running. Most battles will be fought without reaching for anything beyond the PPB.
Have you been in a lot of battles?
No.
He grunted, in a way I couldn't interpret.
We are not a warship, but there are incidents.
What sort of incidents?
You'll learn about it when we get to the station. Now you are learning about the weapons console. Here is the dark matter missile, which is used much less frequently. It is a physical object that employs both dark energy and negative energy to disrupt the enemy's hull at a quantum level. This allows for maximum damage from the dark matter detonations. The standard arsenal for a ship this size is 20 missiles, so there is a limited supply, and depending on distance, they can take anywhere from 1 to 4 seconds from deployment until they reach the target. They're easier to avoid than PPB, but if they hit, they tend to be battle enders. Keep in mind that these missiles are expensive and dangerous to produce, so in real-world situations they are not deployed lightly. If you launch, regulation requires that you confirm contact and assess damage before you choose to launch another.
Okay, I nodded.
Finally, there's the plasma lance. Unless the enemy shielding is configured to avoid solid matter, which would make a ship vulnerable to PPB attack, this can penetrate shields and not only latch onto a hull, but become part of it. You use this when you're trying to capture and tow a vessel.
So it's like a tractor beam? I asked. He made a hissing laugh noise.
Those are just in stories. In real life, you lance a vessel and tow it with a cable that has plasma energy constructs out of ambient matter in space, so it's generally used only on already disabled vehicles. Now, are you ready for a sim?
Sure, I said.
Hold on to something,
he told me, flashing another boar-like grin. Then he called up a menu on the console and used the tips of his claws to click on a few options. My data bracelet chirped and asked me if I wanted to proceed with the simulation. I agreed, and almost instantly there was a bright flash of light. Then we were on the bridge. The main screen showed a ship coming towards us, firing weapons. Lights flashed, alarms sounded, and I may have screamed.
Let me pause a moment,
Urgh said, and we were no longer on the bridge. We were no longer being pounded by enemy fire. He hissed out a laugh.
In case you haven't figured it out yet, your HUD is messing with your vision and hearing to produce a full illusion of the sim. It seems pretty realistic, doesn't it?
My heart was hammering. Yeah, you might have warned me, though.
Oh, that would not have been as much fun. I'd hoped to make you urinate with surprise, but I see your clothing is dry.
I'm sorry to let you down.
Another time, he promised. Now, are you ready to earn some experience points?
It wasn't quite like being on the Star Trek holodeck. I couldn't get up and walk around, and I couldn't interact with anything but the terminal in front of me. But it was still pretty vivid. I felt the ship vibrate when we were hit. I heard the distant boom of explosive decompression and decks collapsing. I made tactical decisions that got my ship destroyed, and later, after a few attempts, I made some tactical decisions that saved my ship. Win or lose, I got to experience an actual realistic battle sim, and I was getting advice and feedback from a trained weapons officer. This was my idea of a good time. After we finished and stepped into the hall, we saw Charles, Niana, and Mi-sun walking towards us, laughing. I noticed the two girls had now reached level 5, and Charles had reached 6. I felt a tightness in my gut just looking at them. They were going to be constant reminders that I didn't belong here. Then they fell silent when they saw us. Charles looked away guiltily. Urgh stepped out in front of them.
Halt!
They stopped and glanced at one another nervously.
This corridor is off limits to guests not accompanied by an officer. You are aware of that, yes?
No, sir, said Charles, worry creeping across his face. No one told us. I thought our data bracelets would warn us.
Unless you tampered with them, Urgh shouted. If you have altered the security protocols of the ship, the captain will send you back to Earth. And that's if you're lucky. If I find out, I'll send you out an airlock. You may check my record if you think I'm speaking metaphorically. I have been reprimanded in the past for such actions.
Charles and Diana cringed. Me son, to her credit, stood her ground, though she looked worried. We didn't tamper with anything, and we have no idea we were breaking any rules.
That's unlikely,
Urgh snapped.
Return to your quarters at once, and know that 1,000 experience points will be deducted from each of you for this outrageous violation of ship policy. Out of my sight, omnivore scum.
They scattered at once. I stared at Urgh. Is that true? I asked him.
Which part?
Any of it?
Oh no, none of it. Of course they can be there. Their data bracelets would have warned them if they had ventured anywhere inappropriate, and you can't take someone's points away, but they don't know that.
And throwing people out the airlock?
That I do all the time,
he said with a hissing laugh, as we proceeded down the corridor. Then Urgh explained that he didn't enjoy games like Approximate Results from Endeavors, which he found insufficiently violent, but he walked me over to the officers' lounge and watched while Yistip and I played for about an hour using the colorful tiles, which were a little bit smaller than playing cards and made a satisfying slap when I set them on the table. Urgh then called it a night, and Yistip and I kept going for another few rounds. I won about as often as I lost, which I thought wasn't too bad, and Yistip seemed impressed. It takes most beings much longer to understand the mechanics, she told me as we cleaned up and put away the tiles. We have similar games on my planet, I told her. It must be a very advanced world, she said wistfully. Well, it has its moments. I thanked her, and then headed back to my cabin, now exhausted and ready for sleep. It had been a great night. Maybe one of the best nights ever, and for a little while I'd forgotten just how ostracized I'd become. But then I remembered, and I thought about how, despite all the friends I was making on the Dependable, in a few days I'd be in Confederation Central, and everyone who had made this experience enjoyable would be gone, and I'd be alone again.